Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and as Zero Hedge reports, Algeria officially launches helicopter money amid sliding oil revenue budget crisis. And as the article kind of goes into, on Sunday, Algeria's prime minister unveiled a plan to plug the country's budget deficit as the OPEC member state looks to offset lower oil revenue by directly borrowing from the central bank, while avoiding international debt markets. In other words, direct monetization of debt, which bypasses commercial banks as a monetary intermediate and is better known as helicopter money. So, John, can you go into this?
Well, we talked about helicopter money before. This is a little bit different of the version that we were talking about, which was, a helicopter drop into people's bank accounts. Now, this is more of a drop of money coming out from the central bank. Now, don't get me wrong here. I actually do agree that it's better to borrow from the central bank, and I talked about this before, versus borrowing from the banksters at a way higher rate. Again, on the other side, I highly disagree with any deficit spending of the government whatsoever, which means that, you're spending more than you actually have in income from extortion of the general populace. So we're going to look at a couple of numbers here, and the first one is the government debt to GDP, which actually rapidly rose from 2015. It was 8.8. Now in 2016 numbers, it was 20.4. So it's a massive rise in debt that they've accumulated because of this oil. Again, another country that is getting hit by, because they were dependent on a lot of oil revenue, the government. And this is insane. Like, the governments are thinking that they could, just live off of royalties of the local, or even own, like in the case of Norway and other countries. Probably Algeria has some ownership in their local oil industry as well. Now,
especially where it's situated, obviously between Libya and, right around the precipice of this massive oil market that's booming.
Well, there's not like a crazy amount of oil in Algeria compared to Libya. Libya's massive oil reserves. Now, Algeria, of course, have, the Mediterranean. That's, I believe, where most of the oil is. I don't think there's very much oil in the actual desert itself. When you look at Algeria, Algeria has a lot of problems. And I'm going to look at a couple of other numbers here that are very important to look at, where you can kind of see where things went south. So, for example, the yearly deficit spending, they already had a deficit spending. They already believed in Keynesian economics, but it's gotten worse and worse by year and year, as you can see. And now currently the government budget deficit is 16% off of GDP, which is very high, like 16%. And then you have their credit rating is very terrible. It's 15, which is close to non-investment grade or even junk. And you see the military expenditure has gone up rapidly as well. I guess that's because of, all this ISIS involvement that, have come through Libya, the failed state of Libya into Algeria as well. And you can also take a look at the current account to GDP, which is negative 13.5. So you see there's a lot of loss when it comes to income from the oil revenue, and but the oil production have stayed kind of the same. It hasn't really moved too much. It's down a bit because of the lack of oil, because everybody's creating oil in order to try to survive. But the problem is there's not enough demand because the global economy has slowed down substantially. So they're getting hit hard here. Now, going back to the helicopter money part, of borrowing money directly from the central bank, what they are doing is, of course, they're taking that money and closing the gap of their deficit spending. The problem is, when deficit spending is terrible, and it doesn't matter if you borrow directly from the central bank or from the banks, the local commercial banks. The problem here is that they're doing deficit spending. They're spending more money than they have. And anybody in the general populace that ever would have spent more money than they had, and then suddenly they are at a limit where they don't have any more money to borrow, they just, go and get another credit card. That's exactly what Algeria is doing. We talk about this so many times here, but it's good to repeat it because there's always new viewers that need to get this information and understand what's happening. Now, this is probably going to end up in a terrible, terrible event, a likely hyperinflationary event, because you're pushing a lot of money, a lot of new money printed into the circulation, and eventually will come out into the commercial banks and then fractionalize there into, tenfold.
This isn't the first time we've seen this by far.
No, of course not. But this is the first time they actually have gone back now from of course, the Federal Reserve is different than everybody else because the Federal Reserve is owned by private banks, and the government has been, borrowing from the Fed and so on in the United States. But everybody else have been using the way of Algeria here in Canada and everybody else, where they borrow money from the commercial banks, because a lot of times the central bank itself might have been, owned by the populace, so they don't want to have to be accountable to the populace. But probably in Algeria they might not know this. Or they might just be owned by the commercial banks as a kind of a Federal Reserve, a mini Federal Reserve. Now, the big thing here is, of course, the helicopter money part. They might just, borrow so much money at one point, going into massive government expenditure, and every time you're letting, a tab where you don't have to pay the tab afterwards, it's going to end up a terrible way. That's where I see it, and a huge risk of potential of massive inflation coming.
Absolutely, and I mean, there's a massive risk of inflation, runaway inflation, and of course hyperinflation in so many countries around this world, because everyone is dependent on a central banking system and a government that's also centralized and, controls your every move. And Algeria is no different, certainly. But what are some solutions that people in Algeria have? I mean, and I know it's Algeria, and I know that by just being Algeria, there's not going to be a whole lot of leeway around a lot of this. But one good side to being in a place like Algeria is there's a lot of independence. Yeah. A lot of people are independent because a lot of people are, well, let's face it, forced to be independent. And, living in a land like that, there's a lot of dangers, and people learn how to take care of themselves. But from your perspective, what are some solutions?
Well, there's a potential here. They got a lot of gold compared to, their size. They got 174 tons of gold compared to Canada's 0.000 whatever we have. And a lot of, so they actually have that chance. If somebody goes to gold standard at one point, if it's the IMF or if some crazy, idea that the United States would do it, there is a potential there that, they could actually be quite well off because they have that gold reserve.
And unless Algeria is seen like every other country that has a lot of gold that won't give it up, like Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, Libya, and on and on and on, Pakistan, etc. Those countries all had a lot of gold, and then when the United States wanted to, trade fiat with them, and they said we want gold, we know what happened to those countries. So you have to wonder, maybe it's better for there to be private ownership of gold instead
of 100%,
government ownership.
No, it's very important. They need to own gold, and I do know that a lot of Arabs, understand gold. There is movements, of course. I highly don't agree with a lot of the Sharia law stuff. 99% of it.
I don't agree with 100%.
No, when it comes to the actual the gold that they forced the system to actually have as backing, the Islamic banking system, that's a different side to what anybody sees here. So it's a little bit more solid actually than the fractional fiat non reserve system that we have here in a lot of Western countries. But of course, the private ownership of gold and silver is so important here, and position yourself, because this is looking like a disaster in slow motion here about to happen in Algeria. And any country before them that has started to print money like this always ends up in a disaster. And it's not going to be a difference with Algeria if it happens right away or if it happens 5-10 years down the line. There's so many currencies that are looking like they're in hyper bubbles right now, and of course with everybody being on the fiat standard worldwide for the first time in history ever, this is a time you need to buy gold if you're in Algeria, and you need to understand that it's always a wealth insurance. And you know, as fiat goes to zero, gold keeps its value, and you don't lose your money if you had it in a stock portfolio in any other fiat currency.
Well, I just wanted to make a quick point because, of course, I know there's a lot of parts of Algeria that is peaceful, but there's also a lot of problems. I would certainly say that if you own gold and silver, physical gold and silver, you should definitely own guns as well, protected, because you don't want to be gathering things for the toughest guy on the block, as the saying goes. But with that said, you know, independence, self-sustainability, financial responsibility, food, water, shelter, defense, and sound money. And if you can, you know, cryptocurrency, yeah, absolutely, be decentralized and be prepared as always. And thank you for going into this with us, John. Until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth,
be the change.
Now to sound like an auctioneer. Thanks for watching, everyone. Check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored by YouTube as they bring in the Anti-Defamation League to flag all of our content as hate speech. Also check our Bitcoin address in the description in the comments, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And don't forget to check me out at Josh Sigurdson at Steemit.com. That's Steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid via cryptocurrency, Steem that is, by the upvote and demand of your post. It's bound to take out the dinosaur social media, so I hope to see you there. But until next time, check out this word from our sponsor.
Are you looking to exchange a large amount of US dollars? Don't overpay with the bank on currency exchange. Think outside the bank. Banks charge unnecessary fees of up to 3%. Truth be told, currency exchange with the bank will cost you hundreds to thousands of dollars. Start saving now. Step 1. Register online. Visit our website and click Get Started. Step 2. Book a transaction. Phone us for a quote and to complete the transaction. We'll need to know which currencies you are converting and how much. Step 3. Transfer of funds. Once you confirm the transaction, we initiate an electronic funds transfer from the account that you choose. Your purchased funds are then transferred back to you in the account that you choose within 1 business day. It's that easy. Start saving hundreds of dollars on currency exchange with CBCE. Sign up online or give us a call today.